Content warning. This video contains discussions of suicide and suicidal ideation. If these are topics you are uncomfortable with, then I would recommend leaving the video now. Please take care of yourself. Also, there will be spoilers for La La Land, I'm Thinking of Ending Things, and The Loser. Have you ever had a dream? It's been 2 years since I started trying again. A lot has changed in that time, but nothing's really changed. The gap between my earliest work and now is massive, but it's hard to tell if any of those adjustments are for the better. Everything just feels like lateral moves. The thought of making something people will find and love is feeling more and more like living in... Have you ever had a dream? My life is full of them. It's hard to think of a time when I wasn't reaching for some fantastical, impossible goal. 2 guesses whether I'm a big fan of La La Land. The old Hollywood and jazz, mixed with the modern existentialism, gives it an energy that's hard to ignore. Brutally lifelike moments of failure and despair are heightened to the same level as abstract dreamscapes of dance and love and joy. If you haven't been lucky enough to hold onto an impossible dream, this movie is what it's like. To be simultaneously crushed and saved by the same little idea that just won't leave your head. The opening musical number is the I Am song for the city of LA and the kind of people that fuel a city full of stars. For every bright pinprick of light, there are a million specks of dust floating through space, hoping for the chance to shine. We all think we'll be the next star, but the transition from speck to sparkle can leave something else in its wake. That kind of energy doesn't just come from thin air. Something must be traded in, left behind, or the reaction won't have the proper propellant. It sounds transactional, and it is. That's show business, baby. The dreamers focus on the show, but it is still business, and in the world of business, transactions are unavoidable. So what are you willing to toss on the fire? We like to stare at the flame, but it's the smoke that matters to the ones who made it. The thing that's already been burned. Few films look at the smoke, and I don't think it's for cynical reasons. If anything, I would say it's optimism that leads most stories to look away from the cost of achieving your dreams. La La Land does a lot of interesting things during its runtime, but the part I can't stop thinking about is the epilogue. Before this moment, it's been very easy to assume you know where this is all leading. This is a romantic musical. It's been hitting all of the right beats, so you allow yourself to ease into the patterns. At the last second, though, it breaks the rules and it calls attention to the smoke. As it finally shows its hand, you realize the trick all at once. This isn't a romance or a musical. It's a tragedy. Have you ever given up on a dream? It's surprising sometimes just how pitifully they die. 1 minute, you've dedicated every second of your life to this idea of yourself, and the next, you suddenly admit that you'll never be that person. It's hard to notice when most of them disappear. Normally they just fade away out of a slow neglect, but sometimes, when things get tough, you might decide to kill a dream. Kill is absolutely the word for it, because even if this version of you never really existed, you can't help but feel the parting is a death. There's a reason that La La Land's ending has stuck with me a lot lately. You see, I'm thinking of... Have you ever given up on a dream? I've certainly given up my fair share. Sometimes it's important to recognize that you can't be everything at once. Prioritizing the right dreams is an important part of growing up. That seems to be what's happening to Jake as he spirals through the history of his life in Charlie Kaufman's I'm Thinking of Ending Things. On a first viewing, that might not seem to be the case, but once you know where this doomed road trip is heading, it's pretty easy to tell what this is. This is what happens when you spend your whole life waiting for your dreams to come true like they do in the movies. This is the result of holding on too tightly to the what if at the center of La La Land's epilogue. What if I had just done this one thing differently? What if I had said something differently? What if I had said something at all? This one isn't hiding the fact that it's a tragedy. Jake's bedroom is full of media and media analysis. He's someone who clearly wants to have something to say, but as he looks back on his life, he only seems to be able to regurgitate other people's words and thoughts. The movie's disconcerting collage of memories and other media makes a patchwork of the influences that make up a life. A poem here, a film monologue there, a review of a movie you thought you liked until it told you not to. Maybe I'm just projecting here, but what I recognize in Jake is a feeling of having something important to say, but being too overwhelmed with a sense of mediocrity to say it right. He's surrounded himself with examples of what it looks like to say something well, and when he looks inside himself to find the thing that aches to be spoken, he instead finds the fear that there's nothing about him worthy of this impulse. He's not special, and all of his knowledge from his reading and watching and painting and debating created nothing to hold on to. I know the reason that in his fantasy relationship with a woman he never talked to, he pretends that they wrote someone else's poem and came up with their own opinions on a woman under the influence. I have the same sickness. Suicide calculated well in advance, I thought. No spontaneous act of desperation. The signs are all there from the beginning if you know what to look for. What's so gut-wrenching about a rewatch of La La Land is how obvious it is that this isn't going to work. Here are just a few examples. In the opening verse of Another Day of Sun, a woman sings about how she left true love behind to chase the call of the silver screen.
But he was sweet and it was true. Still I did what I had to do.
Making it in this city takes leaving everything behind if you even want a shot. Later, in A Lovely Night, Mia and Sebastian both admit that they'd never work.
But I'm frankly feeling nothing.
Is that so?
It's playful banter at this point, but still, it's hard to deny that this wasn't a match made in heaven. Both of them have to put in a lot of work to bridge the gap between them. Finally, during the first rendition of City of Stars, Sebastian starts a dance with someone on the pier while singing, "Is this the start of something wonderful and new?" Before he can finish what he started, the man she was with cuts in and Sebastian turns away, saying, "Or one more dream that I cannot make true." This early into their relationship, and we already get an omen that while they will start something beautiful together, they may not be able to see it to the end. But we know how stories are supposed to go, and instead of seeing these signs as reality creeping its way in, we view them as obstacles that our heroic couple will surely overcome. And then it's too late. This is what makes a tragedy, the inevitability of it all. It's a thin line to ride. If a misunderstanding feels too contrived or a death comes too sudden, then it feels more like bad luck than hubris. But if the ancient Greeks were right, and you can never know for sure with those guys, then this is the appeal of the genre. Experiencing events that could just as easily happen to you while in a safe environment is what catharsis is all about. A tragedy's impact comes from the realization that this outcome was set from the beginning, not because fate forced it into place, but because the very same values which make these characters who they are require them to take the actions that lead to their conclusion. Maybe there was another way in theory, but in practice, this was always how those characters would react. Your principles, the very things that are supposed to make you the hero, instead force you down the road to ruin. Knowing where this all leads doesn't ease the burden of the journey. The movie and the book it's based on are called I'm Thinking of Ending Things. You don't want a prize for guessing that this is going to some dark places. Catharsis is great and all in the moment, but the lesson that we're slaves to our own beliefs and values has never sat well with me. Jake seems just as concerned with what this all means for regular people like him. The fantasy starts as an attempt to tell a different story, to find an angle on his life where it wasn't a tragedy. Maybe it is a bit sad that he has to pretend he asked a girl out when he was younger, but he's more concerned with one question. Would that have made me happy? Will you ever be happy? In the best case, he can imagine a world where if he had just been confident in who he was, then people would have seen him and liked him for it. This is not a story about the best case. The far worse fear is that he was right to stay in his shell. Right to say it's nothing when people ask about his videos. That maybe those instincts which told him to keep to himself weren't just the fears of a socially anxious man, but genuine insight into how the world would view him. If all he had to do was open up, then that's sad, but at least that means he still had worth. If that wasn't the answer, though, if asking the girl out would have just led to a breakup anyway, then what was the point of any of it? Who is any of this for? At dinner with his parents, Jake is embarrassed by their need to hype him up. They talk about how hard he studied and the participation level awards he won, and we can tell that he has spent his whole life trying to grow up and get away from that scared little kid who never felt like he was good enough. Parents who had to bend over backwards to come up with something to brag about. A mouth full of other people's words designed to prove that he was more than people expected him to be. More than just another kid who wanted to be a YouTuber. The real tragedy of it all is that throughout the runtime of the movie, we never actually get an outside opinion on Jake. There are the occasional side glances from a teenager in the hallway, but all of the dialogue is in his head. So even when they wear faces of a girl he saw at trivia night or his mom and dad, they're all Jake telling himself that this was always who he was meant to be. He condemns himself a tragic hero through fictional voices, but it's clear enough that he arrived at this conclusion well before this journey started. He was the writer the entire time. If he really valued himself, then he wouldn't have written a girlfriend who wanted nothing to do with him. If he really thought he deserved any other life, the fantasy could have provided. Jake wasn't looking for a reason to keep going. He was looking for an excuse to stop. To stop hurting. To stop wanting. To stop needing. And when he finally gives himself the permission, we watch as so many influences from throughout his life are caught in the event horizon of this monumental decision. Instead of unraveling around him, everything seems to come together beautifully as a final goodbye to a life surrounded by art. Is it tragedy that the last act of a man who feared that he never had anything to say was so transcendent? Is it concerning that I'm a little bit jealous? Begging for their respect won't make anyone like you more. Who is this? Chester, don't play coy. We know how these things work. The call's coming from inside the house, just like in the movie. Go ahead and call it an homage for me. I'm sure that'll make you feel so much more special for doing this. Quit acting like you're better than me just because I'm willing to admit I care. That's not what makes me better than you. I'm better than you because you can never get rid of me, but with one bad day and a click of a button, I could erase you forever. And I've been thinking lately, maybe it's time to kill another dream. I wouldn't be so sure you're the one in charge anymore, Chandler. You've been thinking for so long, I'm not sure you're capable of actually doing anything. After his studies, Wertheimer could have given several concerts, but he refused, I thought, didn't accept because of Glenn. He was suddenly incapable of playing in public. Just the thought of having to walk on stage makes me ill, he said, I thought. He received numerous invitations, I thought, and refused all these invitations. He could have gone to Italy, to Hungary, to Czechoslovakia, to Germany, for he had made his mark, as they say, with the booking agents merely by his evening recitals at the Mozarteum. But everything about him was pure cowardice toward Glenn's triumph with the Goldberg variations. How can I perform in public now that I've heard Glenn, he often said, while again and again I tried to make him understand that he played better than all the others, although not as well as Glenn, which I didn't say to him, but which he could intuit in everything I said. The piano artist, I said to Wertheimer, and I very often use this notion of the piano artist when speaking to Wertheimer about the art of the piano in order to avoid the repulsive pianist. The piano artist then mustn't let himself be so impressed by a genius that he becomes paralyzed. But the fact is, you've let yourself be so dazzled by Glenn that you're paralyzed. You, the most extraordinary talent that ever went to the Mozarteum, I said, and I spoke the truth in saying so, for Wertheimer actually was such an extraordinary talent, and the Mozarteum has never since seen such an extraordinary talent. Even if Wertheimer, as stated, wasn't a genius like Glenn. Glenn was the genius. Wertheimer? Nothing but pride, I thought. La La Land spends much of its runtime fighting against the urge to re-enter the so-called real world. In their lowest moment as a couple, Sebastian cites the fact that he has to grow up. Their darkest moment comes from a rejection of the dream, a momentary lapse into thinking like Jake. Maybe we're just not special, and instead of risking it all for glory, we just gambled everything away on a bad hand. Mia's business boyfriend Greg, Sebastian's bands, and Mia's job as a barista are all clearly framed as negative things, obstacles that are standing between our protagonists and fully giving themselves over to the dream. In fact, it's only by completely dedicating themselves to it that the dream becomes reality. Mia by quitting her job to write the role that gives her her big break, and Sebastian by giving up steady gigs with the Messengers to open up his club that he has no proof will succeed. I don't think this movie is trying to give the lesson that you should give up everything right now and chase your dreams, but up until the epilogue, you'd be forgiven for reading it that way. This is the rhetorical benefit of looking back at everything we just experienced. You get a chance to reflect on whether or not you agree with the choices they made by seeing the other side of some of those decisions. The most powerful emotion I feel when credits roll is doubt. Did they do the right thing? Was the dream worth it all? More than that, though, one question always haunts me at the end. Could there have ever been a world where that fantasy was a reality? Or did we just watch the sudden death of the dream that Mia and Sebastian could ever be together? The epilogue is working off of its own sort of dream logic. Sebastian's old boss suddenly decides to warm his heart despite never budging on anything in reality. So long, Boulder City has been magically packed with a standing ovation just because Sebastian showed up. When they go to Paris, we get so far away from reality that everything becomes abstracted. With no real-world example to base it on, we're left dancing on the water, surrounded by stars, and watching a poor attempt to stitch Sebastian back into Mia's life by pasting him over her husband. But it falls apart just as quickly because if he was there saying goodbye to their daughter, driving her into the city and walking her into the jazz club, then who's here playing that piano? It could only ever be a dream. I've often heard the sentiment that La La Land is the story of the right people meeting at the wrong time, and I couldn't disagree more. They both left an everlasting mark on the other, but they can never be the ones to finish that dance. Without Sebastian, Mia never would have gone back to writing or taken one last audition. Without Mia, Sebastian never would have compromised on his ideal club enough to make it a reality. But Mia had to go to Paris, and Sebastian can never leave the jazz clubs of LA behind. The right people, yes, but there was never a right time. When the smoke has finally cleared away, all that's left is a memory of the love that got us here. Love for the people who fanned the flames, and love for every little piece of ourselves we tossed in to fuel the fire for one day longer. La La Land isn't sad because they couldn't be. It's sad because they were, and it was beautiful, and we know for certain now that it could never last. When the applause has ended for this impromptu performance from Jake, all that's left is a memory of the pain that got us here, hope for a future that never came, and fear that there is nothing left of you to burn. The howling cold of the wind and snow is all you can hear as the fire goes out and the chill creeps in. I'm thinking of ending things isn't sad because Jake couldn't live anymore. It's sad because he did live, and it was beautiful, and we know for certain now that he could never see that. I would have had to play better than Glenn, but that wasn't possible, was out of the question, and therefore I gave up playing the piano. I woke up one day in April, I no longer know which one, and said to myself, no more piano. And I never touched the instrument again. If I hadn't met Glenn Gould, I probably wouldn't have given up the piano, and I would have become a piano virtuoso and perhaps even one of the best piano virtuosos in the world. Have you ever had a dream? It's been 2 years since I started trying again. A lot has changed in that time, but nothing's really changed. The gap between my earliest work and now is massive, but it's hard to tell if any of those adjustments are for the better. Everything just feels like lateral moves. The thought of making something people will find and love is feeling more and more like living in La La Land. After 2 years of scraping up enough free time to say things that have been on my mind for a while now, I'm starting to wonder if maybe I should have just kept it to myself. Like Jake, I sit here, surrounding myself with better video essays, better channels, more competent, clear, and concise thinkers, and I wonder what I could offer besides half-hearted regurgitation and barely concealed jealousy of everyone who made it. When people I know ask me why I still make these videos despite how miserable it sometimes makes me, the answer has always been the same. I can't imagine myself doing anything else. I wish it wasn't true. I wish I could find this level of inspiration and dedication for any other thing that I do. It's just a sad, tragic fact that making video essays or semi-autobiographical short films or whatever it is something like this would be called seems to be the culmination of all of my passions and decisions over the course of my life. Hubris. Tragedy. Even now, as I struggle to decide whether I should give up on Chester Starling and everything this channel once meant to me, I can't fight the urge to just start on the next video, to push on to the next challenge, the next script, the next hope that this next one will find an audience that likes what they see. Sometimes that feels like a sickness, and other times it feels like a sign that this dream is not one that can fade away, is worth something more than that no matter how much I think of ending things, Chester Starling, star of the Starlings, has become more than I can control. He's thinking of beginning things. Like a tragic hero, staring into the very light that will be his undoing, he trudges on despite my hesitation. He looks out into the fire, which subsists on more and more of his flesh, and he finds just one more piece to slice off. He is a violent thing at times, but I'm no better. I sit by the flames he tends and enjoy its warmth all the same. I wonder sometimes how he can keep going despite knowing all of my doubts and fears. His answer is simple. Have you ever had a dream? City of stars, are you shining just for me? City of stars, there's so much that I can't see. Who knows? Is this the start of something wonderful and new? Or one more dream that I cannot make true?